As many of you know, this coming Tuesday, November 3rd, is Election Day. But not just any Election Day. This is the day where we cast our ballots for the President of the United States, among other important leadership positions in our city, county, state, and country. Now, there has obviously been a great deal of attention given to this election, and with that attention has also come a great deal of emotion. Emotions ranging from worry and apprehension to despair and hopelessness. I'd love to tell you that Christians and the church have been immune from those feelings, but we haven't. And that's because we're humans and we are humans in need of God's grace. But as a Christian, and more specifically as a pastor, I've been trying to think about how this election intersects with my faith. I've also been thinking about how my faith can speak in the current situation that we find ourselves in, both in our country and in our world, but also the place and time in which we find ourselves as Christ followers. Now, with all of that being said, I found myself lately being drawn to the Old Testament, especially the book of Isaiah. Now, if you've read the book of Isaiah, in the beginning, it assumes the background of conflict. Conflict among the northern kingdom of Israel, the southern kingdom of Judah, Syria, and Assyria. Now, Israel and Judah are two kingdoms of God's people fighting against one another, along with these other foreign political powers. And in the midst of all of this fighting and this conflict, the prophet Isaiah consistently urges the people of God to rely upon God. And he delivers words of judgment, especially against their current actions as God's people. But the prophet also spends a great deal of time speaking profound words of promise and hope, announcing God's coming kingdom. Now, as the book unfolds, though, we see that the prophet brings words of comfort and hope at a different time and place. Scholars kind of divide the book of Isaiah into three sections. The first section that I just talked about, the second section, which seems to have been written and directed to the peoples who were in exile, the people of God who were in exile in Babylon in the 6th century. And then the third section is addressed to people who were returning to Jerusalem following the Babylonian captivity. But I've been thinking a lot about that second section, where the people were in captivity. Now, the history of Israel, the history of God's people in the Old Testament, revolves around two emphases of exile and exodus. Now, at the Exodus, Israel began the process toward becoming a nation. They were freed from slavery in Egypt, wandered in the wilderness, all of this to become a nation in the promised land. But then the exile signaled the loss of Israel's status as an independent nation. They became a people in slavery. Now, one would expect this to be a bleak period in the life of God's people. Let's think about it. Jerusalem had been destroyed. The temple was burned. The end of King David's dynasty. And everything that they held true and important to them was damaged and was gone. Yet this was one of the most productive periods in the history of God's people. The people came to recognize that God had not been defeated. Even though they were captive under the Babylonian Empire, God had not been defeated. Furthermore, They learned that God could be worshiped apart from their native land, apart from the temple, apart from priests or monarchs or anyone who was in authority. Without a king, Israel remembered that Yahweh, that God, had always been their true king. A burned temple hundreds of miles away meant there were no sacrifices, but that the Sabbath that God had given them could become a time of worship and a time of contemplating God's words in the synagogue. In fact, if you really think about it, most of the Old Testament was written, compiled, or edited during this time of exile. Now, I mention all of this history to emphasize a point. The point is that despite all of the worry and despair, anxiety and apprehension that many of us may feel around this election, and despite all of the conflict going on in our country and our world, God is still God. God has not been defeated and will not be defeated, regardless of election results. Furthermore, regardless of what happens on Tuesday, Blackman United Methodist Church is committed to being the church that God calls them to be in this community. A place where everyone is welcome, regardless of whether you are a Democrat or a Republican or an independent or nothing at all. Everyone is welcome here. Nobody is perfect, and we believe that with God, everything is possible. Now, I hope you will join me in praying for our country, but also join with me in grabbing hold of the truth that no matter what happens on November 3rd, or really any day for that matter, the kingdom of God will go on. And we as God's people must do what we can by the grace of God to help others experience the true love of God shown to us in Jesus Christ. I do want to remind everyone that our church is a polling place on Tuesday, but the sanctuary will be open from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. for anyone who wishes to come by and pray on that day. If I'm here and you'd like for me to pray with you, I would be glad to. Simply stop by my office and I'd be glad to pray with you. But I hope everybody is doing well and staying safe. But if you need anything, again, please let us know. I look forward to worshiping with you all on Sunday morning, either in person or online, especially for our special worship time on All Saints Sunday at 10 o'clock. But I hope you have a great day, and God bless.